Okay, this is piece 124, the Carson, Pirie, Scott and Company building. It has 3 images. It is a building made in Chicago, Illinois by Louis Sullivan, famous architect. It was made between 1899 and 1903 of iron, steel, glass, and terracotta. The context is that this is in central downtown Chicago. It's a super important building even today. And Carson, Pirie, Scott were department store owners who were looking to sell product in their store. They employed 1,000 people in stores kind of across the Midwest. So Louis Sullivan, architect, coined the phrase form follows function. And what he means is that if Carson, Pirie, and Scott are department store owners and they want a building to sell their product, then the form or excuse me, the function of the building needs to be that, right? I mean, it can't be anything else. And then the form follows that function. So once we design the building to do everything that it needs to do as a department store, then we can gussy it up and add more to it. But the function should be the number one consideration of the architect. So for that reason, he made the bottom 2 levels of the building different than all of the other levels of the building above. We call this the tripartite division. And you can see here on the bottom that these are department store levels. They're taller than the levels above, and they have different windows. The windows down here are much bigger than the windows up above. And it's highly decorated in comparison to the levels up above. The second part of this tripartite division is we've just got this office space. And since that's its function, all of these levels from the 3rd floor on up can look the same. And then the third form, or the third division rather, in the tripartite division is a cornice, an attic at the very top of the building. Sullivan wanted to visually say with architecture, hey, this is the end of the building. It stops here. So he's got a unique kind of cornice going along this building that you don't see on other buildings nearby, if you look around. Okay, so on that base floor, bottom 2 floors, you can see that we have massive display windows. This is for that purpose of displaying stuff to be sold in that department store, in the Carson, Pirie, Scott department store. And you can see here at the Christmas story, these boys, look at their noses pushed up against that window, them looking in at the goods that are for sale. Then, if we look at our kind of floor design, you can see that there are these little dots. And in the Roman and Greek temples, or in the Alhambra, these little dots represented columns. Now, that's not untrue. These still are columns on the inside of the Carson, Pirie, Scott main two bottom floors. But the difference is that these columns are on the center made of steel. And the importance of this is that steel allows Sullivan to build taller 1st and 2nd floors so that we can get light in from those very big windows. That natural light has to get in from the outside window. You can see them way over here into the very depth of the center of this floor, because this is an era when there was no electricity with lights. So they're counting on, if you can look over here, they're counting on the natural light from over here to get way back in this corner over here. And the only way to do that is with massive windows and higher ceiling levels in this 1st and 2nd floor. So steel can make that happen. And this open floor plan will make that happen. If we had walls back here in this back sector, no light would be able to, natural light would be able to penetrate. So we're really dealing with natural light from the outside big windows, steel to make these taller, and an open floor plan to allow that light to flow around. Then The next step that Sullivan relied on are what he called Chicago windows. And he used the Chicago windows on every floor above the two department store floors. It's absolutely stunning, these pattern around those windows. So if you look here, this is my front living room. These are Chicago windows that really took off and were used in the design of homes, particularly craftsman homes. So I don't have a fancy house, but it's an old house with the Chicago windows, meaning that the center panel is big. And then on either side of the center panel, there are two little windows, and those can be opened up to let air flow. Now, if you look over here, Sullivan did that on these floors from this third on up. This also gives it a more horizontal feel rather than a vertical feel. The windows are smaller, or excuse me, wider than they are taller. Okay, then at the top we have this cornice showing that, hey, the building's ending here. And you can see here just, wow, this is kind of going back to the Greek and Roman, super fancy, and columns with capitals at the top, total ornamentation around the side. This is what those columns look like close up. Holy mackerel. Beautiful. Okay, and then in content, we have down on those lower two department store floors, which we're talking function. But here, Sullivan has put some form over function, and the form here is this cast iron ornamentation intended to say, hey, I'm beautiful, and why don't you come on in, customers, and take a look at what's for sale in these bottom two floors. So this is what it looks like today. This is Jewel Gagne, who was a student in AP Art History and who has now graduated and gone on to Chicago to study art and design. And they're standing in front of the Carson Pirie Scott building entrance, which you can see the entrance has like 4 doors. So it's open to everybody. That little round bit here that sticks out is kind of going back to form here, allows people, and here's the Google image, allows people from every angle to enter into this store. It's very welcoming. That's form over function. To let people or function and form. I mean, he's gussying it up, but the function is to get people to come into this store and to buy stuff. And if you can't tell, this is now a Target department store. Okay, and just want to hit real quickly, that whole building's made of steel kind of took off. So this is 30 years later, 1932. This is the RCA building in New York City. This is the 69th floor, the famous image that the newspaper got these men to come out here and sit on this steel girder and get a photograph of them at work or at lunch. So they're all supposed to be eating lunch. And here, this guy, though, he's got a alcohol bottle. None of them is tied off. And this is just 2 years earlier. This is 1930, the Empire State Building, which some of you have probably been up in. I know I've taken some of you up there. And you can see steel. 5 men died making this building. And here you can see why, because none of them are tied off. Safety concerns, what are those? So famous images, steel being used in buildings. This is the Carson Pirie Scott and Company building made in Chicago by Louis Sullivan, 1899 to 1903, made of iron, steel, glass, and terracotta.